Resistance Radio is brought to you by Black Swan Outdoors. Our mission is to help you realize and develop your self-reliance, whether it's in the wilderness or the city center. Today I want to talk about some of the myths of urban survival. I want to talk about some concepts that I think are spread throughout the internets, the interwebs, that I think maybe not entirely are wrong, but I think there are just ways in which we need to think about things a little bit differently in order for those things to be effective. So I want to talk about the gray man principle. I want to talk about bug out bags, and I want to talk about the three priorities of air, water, and food. So let's start at the top and talk about the gray man. It's a concept, for those that are unfamiliar, about blending into your environment, not standing out in a way in which people notice you specifically for a tactical advantage, so that, you know, if you have if you're in a situation where that could be threatening to you, that you stand out in a way that kind of as a target for whatever reason. Maybe it being that someone wants to rob you, or maybe it's somebody that wants to harm you for whatever reason. So basically, it's not, I think people talk about it as being, I'm a gray man, as if it's an identity. It's something that I internalize as something who I am, but it's really not that. It's just learning how to be inconspicuous, really, is what it is. It's learning about how to understand your environment and blend into your environment so that you don't stand out. And there's a lot of different ways in which you do that, and it's not just not having Molly on your backpack, or not wearing camo or 511 or whatever it is. And, you know, sometimes that stuff works to your advantage. I know I had a conversation with a police officer, and he said, well, for concealed carry has gotten to be so big and popular that he can kind of tell that if somebody is wearing 511 or LA police gear backpack, or have some of these kind of more common quote-unquote tactical clothing, that if they're concealed and carrying, they're most likely probably not going to be a threat to him. You know, so that type of individual, although they might have a deadly weapon, is actually, they're flagged as a less of a threat. So it kind of works to an advantage in some capacity. Now, of course, it can work against you. Obviously, it's happened to me twice while traveling. Once in an airport in a foreign country, I was singled out by an intelligence operator who just wanted to do some kind of inconspicuous screening to see what was going on, with why I was there and what I was doing. But it was my backpack. I had a backpack with Molly webbing on it, and was traveling with that as my sole pack, and it was what singled me out. So, I mean, it certainly does work against you. I'm not saying that. But there's a whole story, right? There's a legend that's created about who you are, whether it's consciously or unconsciously. And all these little details play into that, right? And that's what helps you blend in. So it's about being situationally aware, first off, right? But then blending in, using that awareness to the baseline. So you walk like people walk. You talk like people talk. You dress like people dress. But it's also an emotional aspect to it. So you take a guy. I kind of pick on our special operators, right? There's this kind of YouTube image of what a special operator is, and Instagram. I've kind of noticed over the few years, they're big, burly, cross-training guys with big beards and arm sleeve tattoos, right? And this is how you stand out. You know, they're what they're saying in their sleeve tattoo and the big muscles and the beard is, I'm a badass, watch out, right? And this is what they're trying to subconsciously tell the environment around them. So what it says to me is that it's easy to hide it's probably easier to hide the tattoo, and there's ways in which you can dress to kind of dress down your muscles, and you can trim your beard in a certain way that may be a little less threatening, but it's intentionally displayed to promote a particular thing. And that is the complete opposite of gray man. You're standing out as like a badass, or the MMA fighter. You know, you can kind of spot these guys out at a bar real quick. And it's not so much the clothing or the sleeve tattoo or the beards or whatever. It's the attitude. It's the emotion in which they present themselves. You know, they want to be the badass. They want to be an ass kicker, right? And they have that internalized because they need that in the ring. If you're a MMA fighter, or if you're a soldier or whatever, right? You need that kind of perspective of being a badass. But now you've just singled yourself on an emotional level, and people spot these things. They spot these things in a subconscious level. And so if you don't change those things, you can hide the tattoos, you can hide the shave the beard, portray yourself as, you know, as a badass, right? That's going to come out. So it doesn't matter what you do. So there's an emotional level in which you need to kind of internalize and find. There's cultural differences, right, that people pick up on. If you've ever traveled abroad, you can spot an American blocks away. I mean, you can see them. If you've spent any time out of the country, it's hard when you're in the country to see some of the characteristics of what makes us American until you go abroad and you look at ourselves and you're like, wow, that person is American. And, you know, it's very, very hard to say concretely all the different characteristics, but they're there and you can see that. So, you know, being aware of some of these really minute cultural displays is also part of this, and it's not easy. It's not as easy thing to do, I guess is kind of what I'm saying. There's also, you know, speculation or talk. I've heard of people talking about race as being an issue with the gray man, and that if you were, say, a white person visiting a predominantly black country, for example, in Africa, that it's really hard or impossible for you to be a gray man. Well, that's absolutely not true, and vice versa. You can be of a different race and still blend in because of the concept of the legend, right? This idea of who you are and who you've created yourself to be. So let's say you're down in Haiti and you're white and you're visiting and you're white and you want to blend in. How do you do that? Well, there are a lot of missionaries in Haiti, and it's really easy to throw on a pair of Columbia pants and a polo T-shirt or tee and be able to kind of blend in very easily with a missionary. And so that's who you can become, and that's how you can blend into that baseline. Those people are there, right? So there's ways in which you can kind of blend in. One of the analogies I want to make with becoming a gray man, and I see this a lot, is, I guess I'd like to use the example of the kid or the person who doesn't wear a suit very often, and they just haven't quite figured out a suit, right? It's not an attire that a lot of people are very comfortable with that don't wear them all the time. And there's an intricacy to the fit in the tailoring. There's an intricacy to the accessories, like collar stays, or even jewelry to some degree, to the type of belt that you would wear, to how you launder and iron if you do that yourself, right? But then also how you wear it. So you can spot, like if you go to a wedding, you can spot very quickly the individual who doesn't wear a suit very, very often, right? And that's a person who's not fitting in with their baseline. They haven't figured out how to be comfortable with themselves in their environment. So they put on a new pair of clothing and they don't feel like they're themselves. And they kind of telegraph that to the rest of the people in the room, right? You see this in teenagers who are hanging out with a new group of friends, and they're starting to wear different clothes and talk different ways and stuff, but they're very uncomfortable about who that is because they're changing their identity. And that's a really hard thing to do. You can't just slip in and out of identity very quickly. And that's the concept of that gray man is to be able to be inconspicuous, and you have to be comfortable with that. And so you have to be conscious of all these subconscious things. And so I think I don't want to go too far into this because this will make it a really long podcast. But if anyone's interested, we can kind of talk more about that and how to kind of approach it. Situational awareness. Patrick Van Horn wrote Left of Bang. He talks a lot extensively about the psychological implications of being situationally aware. I've got a lot of great articles, or at least I think they're great, but articles on the blog about being situationally aware. I think that's a good place to start in order to kind of start understanding that principle of being inconspicuous or being the gray man. So another thing I want to talk about then is this bug out bag issue, bugging in, bugging out. Okay, so first, I just want to say there is no such thing as bugging in. Okay, that bothers me when I hear that term. I don't know why. Like survivability, I don't like that term either. But the bug out bag, brief, quick history, kind of has two origin stories that I know, and people can disagree with me. One is in the military. There's a lot of terms from the military that that kind of comes into our kind of lexicon, and from what I understand is that the idea of bugging out or is getting out of an area very quickly from a military, deriving from the military term. The bug out bag was a bag that was used by military, whether it be you're a helicopter pilot or in a convoy or you're in a cargo plane, that you'd keep kind of some gear with you that in case you needed to ditch your vehicle of whatever kind quickly, you could grab the bag and use it to help you defend yourself, get back to base, whatever. The other origin of this concept is the 72-hour bag, which came from, I believe, the LDS Church. They're very much into emergency preparedness and wrote a book about it, one of the original books. And in that, they talked about how you need to keep your supplies, your emergency supplies, in a backpack versus like a tub or something, because if your house becomes damaged, you can grab that more easily and all the other things and get out of the house very quickly. And so the bag is strategically 72 hours is because within 72 hours, by that time, maybe that national emergency is declared as such, and FEMA can come in and bring food and water and all those things. So it's really the idea in any survival or emergency or crisis situation is if you can survive within the first 72 hours of that event, statistically, you'll be able to survive that overarching crisis. So if you can get over that hump, you're in a good place. But also, it takes 3 to 4 days for government agencies to kind of amass resources to help people. And anyone who is essentially stocked with food or resources that can get through either the 72 hours or beyond are people who are now allowing other people who are not prepared access to that government food or the aid that's coming in. And so now you're spreading resources out wider and helping more people. So by helping yourself, you're actually helping other people. So that's kind of the background on that. So there's this idea that you bug out, and that's, if your house is in danger, maybe there's a wildfire, or maybe you have to leave because of flooding or whatever, your house is no longer safe. It's nice to have a bag packed, ready to go is kind of the concept. And so there's a lot of people who prescribe this and talk about this. Well, then on the flip side, then people say, well, we bug in. We're going to bug. Well, to me like you are in your home. You're lighting candles and using flashlights instead of your lights if the power goes out. I mean, what's really the difference? There's not that much difference. You already have food. Most people already have food. It's not like you have to have a backpack to survive a power outage or a tornado or whatever that comes through. And so there's really no practical application for a backpack with emergency gear inside your house, for the inside of your house, or using the term bug in. It's sheltering in place. Now, there's some gear and supplies and equipment that's helpful in a power outage, don't get me wrong, and you can choose to put that in a backpack. That's fine. And there's no sense in like having that equipment, if it's helpful in an emergency in your house or outside of your house, that makes sense. Do it. I mean, that's fine. I'm just saying the term bugging in just grinds me. I don't know. It's just use shelter in place. You don't have to make up your own words. Bugging out is kind of something interesting to me. You see people on YouTube, for example, talking about their bug out bags, and this is going on for years and years now, even predated the whole Doomsday Prepper TV show that made prepping so popular. But most people don't think about this is the fact that most people can't walk, right? So you're relying on a backpack to get you out of an emergency area. And I mean, just go to your local Walmart and walk around, and you'll see how many people are sitting in carts, how many people are morbidly obese, how many people are disabled. I mean, there's a lot of people who are just physically broken and they can't walk, let alone are they conditioned to walk because we drive around everywhere, right? It's not like people are all going, everyone in America is going out and hitting our, state park trails, or even walking in the evening. There's some people that are, into exercise and all that kind of stuff. Don't get me wrong. I get that. But the vast majority of Americans, the vast majority of people who are preparing, and you can see them on the videos, are grossly overweight and obese and have some kind of mobility issue. I mean, that's just the statistics, right? I don't mean to sound like an ass about it, but it's true. And if you don't believe me, go to Walmart. Really, do it. It's amazing to see how many people are incapable of walking. So really, I mean, most of the people focus, or the majority of the people are going to be focusing on getting out of an emergency situation within the context of their vehicle. And a lot of people talk about, well, everyone's going to be leaving our town, and it's going to be gridlock, and we're going to have to abandon our cars. Well, that might be true, and that does happen. And people in, say, forest fires or hurricanes and things like that there's precedence for that. So it does make sense to have, that bag prepared, whatever. But go on YouTube after any one of those events, forest fires or a hurricane or whatever, and you're not going to see videos of people saying, God, I'm so glad I grabbed my bug out bag and used it, and this worked out great, and that didn't work out great, and it doesn't happen because no one uses them. If it did, it would be reinforcing the thing, and then more people would be doing it, and it wouldn't be kind of an outlier. And nowadays, people even kind of, snuff at it, and, it used to be a kind of a cool thing to do, and now it's people kind of look down on it. But I mean, the reality is there are times and places when it's useful, and it's not useful for all people, and it's not really anything that it's not always practical, I guess, in that sense. Another thing that's not always practical is what people like to call the bug out vehicle, right? They have these monster trucks and these 4x4s and these, all sorts of vegetable oil run things for the end of the world and all that. It's like, if you wanted a quote unquote bug out vehicle, get one with the highest gas economy you possibly can. I'm talking Prius, right? But there's so much macho, manliness. I'm never going to get caught dead in a Prius kind of attitude. Only buy American. Okay, fine. But gas is a premium. Pumps are a premium. Even if you're kind of caught off guard and you only have a half tank of gas, you're going to want a car with the absolute best gas mileage possible to get out of wherever you're at. I mean, and speaking of which, all these people, they prepare about, their bug out bags and their gear and all this stuff. And it's like, well, a good majority of the population lives in a northern environment where there's this thing called winter. And winter brings along a whole slew of these preparations that I never see anybody pack a bug out bag with a stocking cap and gloves or a down jacket, right? Because they always think that, well, I'm going to bug out and I'm going to make my shelter and it's going to be out in the woods and that's going to be conveniently in the summertime. Well, no, I'm sorry. That's not how war happens. That's not how, whether it be an economic war or a cyber war. You think they're going to attack us in the summer? No, we're not going to be attacked in the summer. If that even possibly happens, let's go down fantasy road here for a minute and think about it. They're going to attack us at our most vulnerable. That's winter. They're going to want to wipe out as many people as they possibly can by taking out our power grid, which can be conceivably done because we do similar things, and there are adversaries. Our adversaries have done this to other countries. Whether they're bold enough to do it to us is another question. But people prepare for the worst. And if you're doing that, you prepare for the worst in the worst environment, which is winter. And like I said, I very rarely ever see anybody doing any kind of contingency planning for the winter. Whether it be winter camping, learning how to, the skills of winter. If you camp in the summer and you've never gone winter camping and minus 20 or minus 50 degree weather, it's a big difference. There are little things that can kill you when you're out in the winter or an extreme cold environment. The other component to this is people talk about their bug out vehicles and how badass they are. But if there's no infrastructure happening, working for us to, say, clear the roads, I'm sorry, it doesn't matter how freaking awesome your truck is. If there's 3 feet of snow on the ground, you're not going anywhere with your truck, right? I mean, the likelihood of you getting out of wherever you're at is pretty similar too. So, it's not that I'm saying that these things are bound to absolutely happen. It's just no one ever talks about it. They don't look at it in that context. And, maybe you live in the South and it doesn't matter. Well, that's fine. That's great. It's just something that, we overemphasize on these things. Well, I'm going to, buy the biggest and flashiest bug out bag I possibly can, when the likelihood, statistically, you're just not going to be able to, you're not going to use it, right? It's kind of like the concept of the survival knife. Why buy a super, $300-400 survival knife in which isn't really specialized in any one task to do any one thing great, and the likelihood of you using it is very slim because the likelihood of you being in a survival situation is very slim. And even if you were in a survival situation, it's even slimmer that you would actually even have that knife in the first place. So this is why survival knives are kind of a great misnomer in that capacity. Cash is going to get you everywhere. Having money, so having financial stability is the most important thing. Having liquid cash available and physical cash available. Have an idea of a hotel that you can get to is more important than investing in a quote-unquote bug-out location. Get to a hotel outside of your region, and that might be just fine, right? If you have dogs or cats, make sure that that hotel takes the animals. Have that hotel on speed dial so you can be the first to make the reservation and get there. Have the cash and understanding that those prices are going to be higher. Food's going to be higher, everything's going to be higher because we live in a capitalist society. And we have a lot of hardcore right-wingers who are super excited to be part of a capitalist society when everything goes well. But when things go wrong, those capitalists tend to prey on those individuals, and the system begins to work against you. Right, wrong, or indifferent, just be prepared for the economic system to start working against you very, very quickly. So having cash on hand, don't worry about the bug out location as much. Just get those at the concept of friends and family that you can stay at, hotel you could stay at. There's other places that you can think about. I always like the emergency bag, the concept of an emergency bag, which is just a regular sized bag that can go on, that can be checked on an airplane, and has a few changes of clothes and some important travel stuff. And then say you get Aunt Jenny gets sick and you need to go take care of her, you can jump on a plane and not have to worry about packing. You need to get out of your house quick for whatever reason. Maybe you're in an abusive relationship and you need to get out to stay somewhere for a few days. You have a bag packed, ready to go. You grab it, you go. Maybe there's a house fire and you have the time to grab that one bag and that's it, right? Grab that suitcase. Maybe there's a funeral, death in the family, unexpected illness, whatever. You're an unexpected illness. You got to go to the hospital for a few days, or send somebody to your house to grab a few things for you. They can grab that one bag. It's much, much more practical, and you don't have to spend that much more money because most people already have a travel bag of some kind and already have some clothes and that kind of thing. So those types of things are much more practical than. So let's talk about the three priorities. We hear a lot of people talk about these priorities. 3 minutes without air, you can't live. 3 days without water, you can't live. And 3 weeks without food, you can't live. So there's a couple things. Let's talk in these categories about these misnomers of these things and kind of jump into that. So 3 minutes without air, really, unless you're drowning, it's not going to be an issue. So let's talk about gas masks, all right, in this context. This is an urban preparation that I think is, valid in many capacities, but there's some limitations. So what is a gas mask good for? Okay, well, let's say the military uses the acronym NBC, nuclear, biological, and chemical. So nuclear certainly can happen. I'm never say it never. Geopolitical alignments can happen to make that outcome very, very possible. Most of the state actors that have nuclear weapons won't enact on those things because they don't want the backlash, right, to happen against them. That's the internal deterrent, unless there's the geopolitical alliances necessary in order to deal with that. So if you're in a targeted area, you're probably going to get wiped out anyway. If not, have to deal with the fallout. So really, it certainly can be useful in that. I don't want to spend too much time on that end. On a biological end, that also works well. A little overkill. If you're looking at some kind of biological threat, from a disease, pandemic, to maybe a militarized disease of some kind, an N95 mask, for the most part, can do most of that. It's a little overkill. But again, if you got one thing and it's sturdy, right, it's designed to withstand abuse, great. Chemical, again, chances of that happening, very, very, very slim. You can get away with chemical in many different capacities, but chemical weapons often affect the skin just as much as what you inhale. It's not a huge kind of realistic deterrent. Now, if you're worried about widespread protesting and police using tear gas, and you're in an area where you're trying to move from point A to point B, okay, I get that. But again, that scenario is pretty specific and not very likely. Then there are people who talk about using gas masks for fire, for a house fire. You could theoretically justify that in that capacity. Not all fires are the same, but It certainly might help kind of filter out some of the particulates that you might breathe in a fire. But fire consumes oxygen. In extreme fire, fire scenario, you're going to suffocate. It might protect you from, some of the smoke and some of the particulates that are burning. But, again, in a, if there's no air, the gas mask isn't really going to do anything for you. It's not going to help you. That's why you see firefighters with self-contained. Now, obviously, they're going into a raging fire, right? That's house fire. We're trying to get out, so it's a matter of lessening the damage, because you're not staying in looking for somebody. You're trying to get out as quick as possible, and I think that there is an element to that. Certainly, there's the risk of the mask itself melting onto your face, but again, we're looking at getting out. So perhaps maybe the filter also is cooling off some of that air, so you're not burning your tissues as well. I don't know. I'm not an expert in this, but I'm saying, in the Benghazi attack, smoke inhalation, and many other instances of terrorist attacks where people try to burn someone out, is certainly a threat. And they if they would have had a smoke hood, which is something that most like the Secret Service, DSS, private bodyguards, these individuals have like this self-contained hood that you can keep in your pocket, and they can give it to their client very quickly, or whoever they're protecting, to put over their face, and kind of self-contained. So it's kind of a nice, more practical apparatus than maybe a gas mask for most situations. It's not going to hurt anything to have one, but the usefulness is so it's individual call, whatever. I don't want to go on too long about that. So water is something I always see a lot of videos on, and I'm going to talk about this from an urban context, not a wilderness context. If you want to listen to water treatment in a wilderness context, or with the 10 in my 10 C's podcast, do that. But one of the most important things about treating water, or that's out and exposed, is one of the things you want to think about is the fact that most water that we drink comes from aquifers for the majority of the time. It's way more expensive to treat surface water than it is just to pump water out. So it's easier, cheaper for us just to pump water that's been essentially filtered by Earth than pulling it off the surface. The surface water has the potential for tons and tons of contamination, right? So, these individuals say, well, I've got my stainless steel water bottle, and in an emergency situation, I'm going to boil water. Well, first off, they don't know what boiling water is like. It sucks. It takes a lot of time to start a fire. It takes a lot of time to boil. It takes a lot of time to cool. And it takes a lot of time then now to drink. And if you have to do that day in and day out, that's not terribly fun. Obviously, we're talking about quote-unquote survival. That's different. It's not a bad alternative method, but it shouldn't be the method that you rely on. Boiling doesn't really, it kills the bacteria and the protozoa and viruses, but it doesn't take the heavy metals out. It doesn't take pesticides out. All right, so most of us live in an urban environment, so if we're going to be taking surface water from an urban environment, we're taking polluted water. This is just what it is. It is absolutely polluted water, and it doesn't matter what you boil, it's still going to be pretty nasty, right? So if you're in an area where, let's say you're in an area where there's a college town, right? Or an area where there's hospitals, okay? That means there's a ton of sick people. And the sick people are taking lots of drugs. And the excess chemicals within the drugs that they're taking are being urinated out into the surface water. And in those universities, all the girls that are taking birth control pills are relieving hormones into the surface area, right? So much so that it actually augments the fish and amphibians in those areas. It actually physically deforms them. So many hormones that are being pumped into the environment. That's kind of a drastic example, but it's true. There's some serious thought from industry waste, right? These heavy metals, mercury, etc., going into our environment. The hormones and chemicals from drugs, right? Straight up waste and all sorts of nasty things. You don't really want to be drinking that, right? Water retention ponds are just filled with oil and other chemicals from cars driving by. I mean, it doesn't make a lot of sense. Now, let's say we're going to walk out of the environment and go into a rural area. Well, again, we make it a habit to pollute our earth for economic means, and so very seldom do we have a lot of real control over what farmers are doing to the land and water. I know it's a hard pill to swallow, and it sounds like I'm talking against the farmers who provide us with food, but the truth is, in confinement farming with hogs, chickens, cattle, etc., it's an extreme amount of manure going into our waterways. If we're talking about commodity crops, where there's tons of spraying of chemicals, of pesticides, of nitrogen, of fertilizers, all excess running into our waterways. All waterways in rural environments are absolutely polluted. You never want to drink out of that stuff, that kind of water, if you can get around it, for those reasons. And so you just, even springs aren't even, there's places where there's a limestone base. It's called a karst region, has a limestone base that doesn't allow water to permeate through very quickly and comes out in the form of a spring, but it's really more of just surface water coming out of the ground, and it's not truly filtered by the earth and the bedrock and such. So it's not a very healthy water. So even a lot of people who believe, say in Southwest Wisconsin, Illinois, Iowa to Pennsylvania, where they have this limestone base, this karst region, think they have springs on their property, and it's not a true spring. It's just a stream that's underground a little ways. And so by not understanding where that water comes from, you don't really know. So if you came to say a place where there looks like, well, I got a spring, well, it's not really safe to drink entirely. Yeah, I mean, just these are just some realities that I think that a lot of people don't talk about. In terms of treating water, one of the things that I see a lot of people not do when they talk about filters is having some kind of case or protection for the filter. You crack your filter and it's junk, right? And that's a problem with filters. They're heavy. They're cumbersome in many ways. But they drop and hit a rock or something while you're pumping or whatever. That's it, for the most part. So you have to protect your filter. And I just see a lot of people that don't do that. I never understood why. A lot of people focus in on chemicals. You can use chlorine to treat if you're allergic to iodine. A lot of people have liquid iodine in their backpack in the first aid kit that can be used to treat water. You don't have to use, quote unquote, iodine tablets. And bleach works well too. Chlorine bleach can work well to disinfect water just the same. And it'd be a lot easier and cheaper for you to carry a small vial of bleach than it would be for you just to rely on boiling your water. So you don't have to make this an economic concern that, I can't afford a filter when there's something like household bleach for 99 cents available to you for a gallon of it. So no one ever really talks about that for whatever reason. Water is really important, and I think that there's a lot of misnomers out there about its safety and within the environment and the context of an emergency situation. So just something to think about. Certainly, if you're getting water out of your tap and and you're still getting some kind of pressure, and they're saying there's a boil. You want to boil to kill any of those potential pathogens. So just keep in mind what your environment is, and how you're getting that water, I guess, is most important. Now, food's really quite interesting. I watch a lot of YouTube videos. If you probably haven't noticed in the podcast, I refer to that. But when people talk about survival, wilderness survival in general, but bugging out, they say, well, I'm not going to carry food with me because I'm going to be able to hunt, and fish for my food. There's this thing called the 90-10 rule, and I don't know, maybe I just made that up, but this concept of 90-10 rule of acquiring food, and this is in any prehistoric to primitive, quote-unquote, cultures out there, 90% or closer to 80 to 90% of all the food that a civilization gets is from hunting and gathering. And from gathering nuts and berries and tubers and things of that nature. In many primitive cultures, the man is known as the mighty hunter and the provider, but they really provide only less than 10% of the food for that community. Hunting is hard. Hunting and trapping is really hard. And it's not something that you want to really focus in on as your sole means to supplementing your diet. Foraging is going to be a lot more important or effective. People say, well, they have, I got all these traps and snares. Well, you got 6 snares in your backpack, and that's it? And that's all you're going to rely on? Can you make a figure 4 deadfall? Because you're going to be making tons of those and putting them all over the environment. You can't just make one trap and rely on it. You can't just think, well, I'm a great fisherman, so I'm going to rely on my fishing skills to pull fish out of a river. Or I'm a great hunter. Well, packing some food, have some food storage, or learning how to forage, or some of the other things. I'm just saying the attention in this kind of macho perspective to survivalism is what's going to catch certain individuals. And this macho concept of being the mighty hunter isn't really going to get you anywhere anytime soon. Some people are better at hunting than others, and some people are better at fishing than others. But again, it's not a skill set that you're always going to be able to rely on. You're better off relying on your ability to store, cache food, and forage and such, and so on and so forth. So if any of that stuff is ever to happen, which is highly, highly unlikely. I see a lot of people backpacking food as food storage. And again, this is something that I think is also something to be concerned about for a short amount of time. It's not certainly a problem, but backpacking food is designed to supplement someone that's doing activity. It's not means for someone who's being inactive, essentially. It's high in sodium. And, as you're moving and hiking and sweating and you're depleting your sodium, it tastes really good on the trail because you don't have the sodium and the electrolytes and some of the minerals that you are sweating out. But off trail, it's not very healthy, I don't think, personally, to be eating. So, I think you're better off just going to the supermarket and coming up with, alternative ways in which you can, take a little extra time to put together some menus and some non-perishable food items at the grocery store that you're going to get a better value for, and it's going to be healthier for you. And you can regulate your calories a lot better as well. So I think that's just a shortcut that a lot of people rely on. MREs, again, are another example. For a short amount of time, not a problem, but to live on an MRE for a year or whatever that some people prepare for is extremely expensive and not very realistic. Now, I think it is important to understand that in a crisis situation, people don't have time to cook, right? They don't have time to prepare. So while I'd rather be spending my time pulling the trees out of my windows and cleaning up my yard, say after a storm, than cooking a three-course or five-course meal or something. So I just think it's there's for a short amount of time we need to focus on getting the house cleaned up, or getting from place to place without having to stop. And so I mean those are just a couple of things as we get into this kind of urban survival podcasts. I think we'll do a few more. I'm very happy to go into more detail on any of these points, so please let me know if you're interested in hearing more about that. With that, I want to thank you for survival podcasts. I think we'll do a few more. I'm very happy to go into more detail on any of these points, so please let me know if you're interested in hearing more about that. With that, I want to thank you for listening, and I look forward to hearing from your comments and questions. Thank you for listening to our podcast. Please visit our blog for articles and more information at www.blackswanoutdoors.com.